Welcome to our video blog series at National Drug Screening. I'm your host, Tom Fulmer. I'm the Vice President of Business Development here at National Drug Screening. And again, joining us today is Joe Riley, the President of National Drug Screening. Welcome, Joe. Appreciate you joining us today.
Pleasure to be here, Tom.
Yeah, and we have a great topic today, something that's the cornerstone of drug-free workplace programs for any company out there. And that's drug-free workplace policies and marijuana, things you need to know a lot about. And something that my guest here has been involved in for a number of years, from expert witness testimony to 30 years in the drug testing industry, to consulting, to training, to a lot of different areas. So, Joe, appreciate that. Appreciate you being willing to share some drug-free workplace information and marijuana information with us.
Absolutely. So I'll give some basic overview, Tom, and I know you get questions from our audiences and clients, and you can throw some questions at me. So marijuana is a big, big issue in the United States of America. It is currently illegal on the federal level. We're talking late 2023 into 2024 of rescheduling marijuana. That didn't happen. It's kind of off the table at the moment. Okay, but on a state level, marijuana is legal in many, many states. Okay, and companies have an obligation to understand in the state where they operate, or multiple states where they operate, what are the laws regarding marijuana and their drug testing program. Now, to back up, DOT drug testing programs, those employers regulated by the United States Department of Transportation, must test for marijuana. It is a prohibited substance, and if someone's positive, they must be removed from the safety-sensitive position. And to get back into that safety-sensitive position, they must go through a substance abuse professional program that may require treatment and or education, and then they would have a return-to-duty test, either come back to the original employer, who may have fired them and they won't be coming back, or a new employer, so to get back into the industry. But from a non-DOT standpoint, we got to understand where we operate. What are the laws? In New York State, for example, you cannot test for marijuana. There are still companies in New York State testing for marijuana.
They do.
Okay? They are breaking the law in New York State. There are some restrictions in some other states. So if you operate in California and you don't know anything about the California law on testing for marijuana, you probably need to call me or Tom.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of an overview there. You got to know the marijuana laws in your state. You can go to our website, nationaldrugscreening.com. You go to our employer section, and there's a chart for every single state that will tell you the marijuana laws for that particular state. Okay. We just wrapped up a project for a company that has facilities in every state in the U.S. Okay. And we took their drug testing policy and we put 50 addendums to it. An addendum for every state on what do we do about marijuana. And maybe what do we do about some other things. Because there are one or two states that say for any drug, you can't terminate on the first offense. So you just got to know what your state is. Now, we're not going to go through every state here today, but what questions are you getting, Tom, from our clients and prospects?
Yeah, I think that's a great point is, one, can we test, and under what circumstances can we test? Sometimes they're asking what actions we can take, and that's not necessarily from the drug testing perspective. That's going to be a different state law perspective.
Great point, though.
But it has to be covered, kind of within that.
Yeah.
So I think one of the
biggest... So that's a few questions.
Well, I was going to say,
them down.
Exactly. One of the biggest questions I get is, first of all, can we test for marijuana?
Okay. So marijuana testing is legal in the United States for employment purposes, except in New York State. Okay. And then there's some restrictions in other states. Okay. But pretty much you can test for marijuana in the United States. And in New York, there are exceptions where you have to test for marijuana.
Right.
So depending on where you're located, you got to know what's going on in the state that you're located in. But marijuana testing, workplace testing for marijuana is legal.
So the other kind of question that we get is, how can we test for marijuana? Because that actually has come up in state laws as well. What ways can we test for it if we can test for it?
Sure. And some states are very concerned with what people can do at home on their own time. Okay. And so if you're doing a urine drug test for marijuana and they smoked a joint on Friday night and you're testing them on Monday or Tuesday, that may be why they're positive. We don't know for sure,
right,
but it may be why. So California says, that doesn't work for us. Okay. You can't use urine because urine's detecting a metabolite that may have been ingested into your body yesterday, the day before, Friday night, whenever. We just don't know. So don't use urine and don't use hair. So what are we left with? We're left with oral fluid testing, which tests for the parent drug of THC, what went into your mouth, that's in your oral fluid, and it determines very recent drug use.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's a big shift going that direction for that reason, especially for like post-accident reasonable suspicion when you're looking for that most recent use that's not showing up. And that's a question that we also get kind of often. It's like, if should I use one testing methodology or should I use multiple testing methodologies when I'm testing for marijuana, and does it matter?
Yeah, it does matter, and you might use multiple testing methodologies, or you might only do oral fluid, but only doing urine might be dangerous from a liability prospect because, as you alluded to, what we do with the result now becomes important also depending on the state law, because there are some state laws that say you can't fire somebody for a marijuana positive. So we can test for them in some cases, but in some cases we're limited on, we have a positive test, we're limited on what actions can we take. Can we take adverse action? Can we terminate? Can we require employee assistance programs? So there's details in certain states about what you can do with the outcome of the test.
Yeah, and that kind of ties into another thing that gets brought up quite often by our employers is if we're operating in multiple states, kind of two ways of this. One, if we're operating in multiple states and we have locations in multiple states, can we have just one corporate policy, or do we have to look at those different ones depending if we just have an employee in that state versus do we have an actual business entity or location in that state? Does that come into play as well?
Yeah, so typically we help employers with their drug-free workplace policies, okay? And we determine where's their headquarters, where's the bulk of their people, okay? Let's say they're in Kansas, okay? We write the policy based on the laws in that state. But they also have employees that live, work, or sometimes work in another state, Oklahoma, Colorado, whatever. So we write addendums to the policy that say when in Oklahoma, this is what we can and this is what we cannot do. So we don't necessarily need separate policies. We have a foundational policy, and then we have some addendums based on the states that we operate in, and it's basically where is the employee getting tested? If they're getting tested in Oklahoma, we got to follow the Oklahoma law.
Right. And I think that's a really key point out there is to understand that you do have these different state laws that you've got to work with. And if you're operating in that area, it's really hard for a DER or designated employer representative, the drug and alcohol program manager for the company to keep up with all of these. So having somebody to go to get those resources, I think, is absolutely critical. But then there's also the ones that will ask us things like, well, it's really complicated, so we're just thinking about dropping marijuana altogether. And we hear that sometimes. What are your thoughts on when you hear that kind of response?
And companies have done that. So we'll just eliminate marijuana from our testing program. And you have every legal right to do that, okay? And then your employee has an accident, maybe kills somebody, and they do some testing when he gets to the hospital, okay? Right. Because that's what they do at a hospital to find out if you're on any substances before they give you new substances. And it turns out they're positive for marijuana. And the family of the dead person gets that information through Morgan & Morgan or whoever their attorneys are. Could be Morgan & Morgan. They're everywhere. They're the biggest, right? Okay. And they might start filing some lawsuits against everybody. Okay? Because their family member died, and apparently this person was smoking marijuana. So there is some risk and there is some potential liability when we just completely drop marijuana testing. Now, maybe you drop it for pre-employment, but you might want to have a robust random testing program. You might always do post-accident testing. You might always do reasonable suspicion testing. And those should probably always include marijuana testing.
Yeah, and just to make sure we're clear on this too, all of these different state laws about marijuana, we're talking about non-DOT versus DOT. You want to speak to that a little bit and also maybe touch on the questions that we get from some of the employers out there about this is, well, what about CBD and how does that apply to our policy in a marijuana positive? Is it a positive or is there other things going on with it? Help us understand that a little
Yeah,
bit.
so again, we mentioned earlier that if you're DOT regulated, for those DOT safety sensitive employees, marijuana is prohibited. And if they test positive, it's a violation. Okay. Now they test positive and you tell them it's a violation and they say, well, I bought these CBD gummies. I didn't smoke pot. I bought these CBD gummies. Well, here's the challenge with that, okay? The CBD industry is not regulated by anybody. The FDA does not approve their products or their labeling. And their labeling typically says less than 0.03% THC in this product. And based on our studies, that won't cause a positive test for marijuana. However, I know people, you know people, that have taken these products and then gone down for a drug test.
Tested
And
positive.
they tested positive.
Absolutely.
I know people that have bought these products that said less than 0.3% THC and tested these products, and they were more than 3% positive for THC.
Yeah.
So in the DOT program and in any drug-free workplace program for non-DOT, employee education is always very important to a drug testing program. And part of that employee education should be, in my opinion, and many other opinions, is take CBD products at your own risk. Right. Because if you test positive for marijuana, the lab cannot tell me if it's because you smoked a joint or you ate a gummy or you put lotion on your skin. The lab doesn't know that. They know there's the metabolite of THC or the parent drug of THC in your system. We don't know how it got there, but you're violating company policy.
Absolutely. And CBD is CBD, marijuana is marijuana, and even though it comes from the same plant, there's not an overlap. CBD does not cause an impairing effect, whereas THC and marijuana does. So it's kind of that buyer beware, I think, is an absolutely essential understanding of that program.
Yeah, it's just a quick funny story. I have a colleague up in Milwaukee that owns a drug testing company like we do, okay? And she said she went, she bowls on a team. Okay, so she went to her bowling league, and at the bar they had a special on a drink, and you got a shot of infused, a dropper. They dropped in a little bit of CBD. Okay.
Yeah.
So she had one drink. She's not really a big drinker, and she got the little dropper of CBD oil or whatever it was. And 2 days later, she went and did a drug test on herself, and she was positive for marijuana.
Oh, wow. That's crazy. Well, and there's also, the THC-infused drinks, so not the CBD, but the actual THC drinks, too. And you really have to be careful about what's out there, especially in these states that have legalized the recreational use of marijuana. You never know what it comes in, cookies or gummies or candies or drinks or anything like that. So you really have to pay attention to that. And employers need to be aware of that kind of thing too, which is, I think, an important part of their drug-free workplace program and the employee education part of that, because the employee may be doing something they don't even realize is, and yet it's creating a legal liability and a safety issue because they're drinking something on the way to work because it's some kind of, energy drink, but it happens to be infused with, for example.
So part of a drug-free workplace is employee education.
Absolutely.
Okay, you got to educate the employees what's a violation, what violates this policy, and if there's THC in your system, it violates this policy. It doesn't matter how it got there. It violates this policy. So it's critically important. Use CBD at your own risk. And another item that comes up, just because I just thought of it, is employer gets the drug test result on Tom, and Tom comes in and sees me. Hey, Tom, you're positive for THC. And Tom says, well, Joe, you know me. I don't really smoke pot, but I was at this party Friday night, and I took one hit. So you took one hit of joint pot, Tom, right? Never ever smoked it ever?
Apparently I did.
Okay. So the lab test result that says positive for THC doesn't tell me that you were at a party, doesn't tell me that you only took one hit, doesn't tell me that you never smoked pot any other time in your life. Exactly. It tells me that Monday morning when you went in and gave your urine and it went through your body, it found the metabolite of THC. You could have used it 5 days ago, 4 days ago, 3 days ago, or one hit on a Friday night, but we don't know that. You violated the company policy.
And I think that's absolutely critical, that employee education aspect of that, because anybody who is actually abusing a drug is never going to tell you that that's the case.
Right.
Because if they really believed that was the case, they would have already gotten help themselves in
Right.
some kind of way. So as the employer, that education component is extremely important. And as you mentioned too, having those consequences in place and making sure that's clear for the employees. Yep. In fact, I know in some of the drug-free workplace programs in certain states, not only is employee education and supervisor education training required, but recurrent employee education is required, like state of Alabama and a few other ones has actually
Iowa.
a recurrent.
I'm doing one right now for a company in Iowa. Yep,
it has that
absolutely.
recurrent training because just the one time you did training 3 years ago, you may forget something.
Absolutely.
Whereas that knowledge is going to help you, that deterrent factor. Again, it serves as that factor.
Absolutely. It reminds me sometimes of not just marijuana. So your policies have to be very clear, but in some of the cases I've worked in as an expert witness, sometimes it's the applicant or the employee and their attorney is hiring me and they had a positive drug test and they didn't get the job or they got fired and they say, oh, I never used that drug, They're positive for cocaine. And I say to the attorney, before I take this case, I'd like to talk to your client for a couple of minutes and say, tell me what happened, They did the collection. Maybe there were issues at the collection. Maybe they weren't. Okay. Sometimes they claim their specimens got switched or whatever. Tell me how that could have happened. And then I say, well, the MRO called you, right, and told you you're positive for cocaine, and I don't think you had any medical explanation for that. They don't use cocaine for dental surgery anymore.
Right.
Okay. Years ago they did.
Unless maybe in Mexico. Maybe.
It's not in Coca-Cola anymore. Okay. Years ago it was.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
But I always say to that employee or applicant positive for cocaine, I said, did you use cocaine? What do you think they say? No. Mm-mm. And then I say, have you ever used cocaine? What do you think they say?
No, never.
And then I say, let me ask you one more time. Have you ever in your life used cocaine? And then it starts coming out. Well, I used to use cocaine.
When I was in college.
Okay.
In high school.
And that kind of gives you a clue that maybe they used it again. So
right.
That can happen also.
Yeah. And that's the important part, too, of understanding your policy and the processes associated with it, of them signing off on it and all the things with the collection process and all that.
Up-to-date policies are critical.
Very important.
If your policy is 20 years old, you need a new policy.
100%.
And marijuana and policy, really, really important.
Absolutely. Well, Joe, thank you for joining us today. I think it's a lot of great insights related to drug-free workplace policies, and especially with marijuana. There's a lot of complications. There's a lot of nuances, a lot of differences between states and sometimes even cities, depending on what's going on, the difference between federal. And that's always changing, too. And we do have some great information. We have a state laws page on nationaldrugscreening.com's website. You can see marijuana laws by state, as well as other things related to
general laws also.
General laws,
two different charts.
Two different charts, exactly. And we work to keep them updated, but there's always these changes going on out there. So I encourage you, if you're an employer, you haven't updated your policy yet, you work in multiple states, you're not really sure if your policy complies, if you're doing those right things, reach out to us and we can be of help. Before we wrap it up, Joe, do you have any last minute tips you want to give them or a couple of summaries of takeaways?
Policy, education, supervisor training, and follow your policy.
Outstanding. Well, thanks for joining us today. Again, Tom with National Drug Screening. Check out our other videos on our YouTube channel here. Make sure you like and subscribe to keep updated on the new ones coming out. And visit www.nationaldrugscreening.com. There are a ton of resources there for you. And as always, you can reach out to myself or Joe, especially if you're an employer. We're always happy to work with you and help you have a compliant drug-free workplace policy and program.